My name is Michael, and I'm the Inside Communications Director for Human San Quentin. The contents of this episode include strong language and graphic descriptions of violent crimes that may include sexual assault. This podcast is intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to the powerful closing episode of this season of the Prison Podcast. We've saved an incredible episode for last with Martina, a victim offender dialogue facilitator. Martina has dedicated her life to helping people through some of the hardest and most transformative conversations imaginable. In this episode, she takes us through the complexities of trauma and the powerful process of holding space for each other. With her wealth of expertise, Martina also shares valuable insights on how we can better educate the public about the importance of this work. As Martina wisely says, trauma exists on both sides, and what we actually need is engagement, tapping into our evolution and responding with love. Can we forgive? Can we have compassion, which means staying present in the face of suffering? Good afternoon, Martina. Thank you for being here with us today. I'm excited to share your knowledge with the world. To start, could you bring our audience up to speed by sharing more about the organization Ahimsa? Specifically, can you explain their role in facilitating connections between two individuals who have been affected by the same crime?
So the Ahimsa Collective, Ahimsa is Sanskrit and means do no harm. And Ahimsa was founded by Sonia Shah, who has her roots in India, hence the Sanskrit word Ahimsa. And it just started with collecting people and people who have a big heart and passion for restorative justice. We do multiple things. There's like 4 pillars of the Ahimsa Collective. We have 2 reentry homes in Oakland that operate on the people first paradigm, like really centering people's needs. And then we have a retreat center in the Santa Cruz Mountains, where people get to convene for free. This is particularly for people of color, grassroots organizations that focusing on doing work in restorative justice and, people work. And we particularly want to bring out people who've not have the opportunity to be out in nature. And then we have Life Comes From It, which is a philanthropy circle, grant giving circle. And then the last pillar is the Healing Pathways, which encompasses restorative justice in the community. So, and the way this works is that a person who wants to do a victim offender dialogue will reach out to the Office of Victim Services. Then there is a screening of the incarcerated person to see if they're suitable. They look for this person emotionally, physically capable. Are there disciplinary actions? Are they violent by nature? So there's a suitability checkup. If there is restraining orders, if there is active appeals and court proceedings, then they're not able to participate in the victim offender dialogue. If the institution finds them suitable, victim services will decide which organization is going to be tasked with the facilitation. That mostly depends on location. Once we know that we can move ahead, victim services reaches out to the organizations, to the director or program manager, and then they find facilitators. We'll also get connected with what's called the ROD liaison, the person in prison who supports us to facilitate making a victim offender dialogue happen inside the prison. And then the program manager director finds suitable facilitators and then reaches out to the survivor to also start connecting with the survivor, really understand who they are, what they need, what kind of facilitator might be best suited, making sure we pay close attention to language, gender, like in sexual harm. We always particularly ask, is a man okay? Do you need it to be a female facilitator? So we pay really close attention to what the needs are. Race is important, language is important, age is important. So do our best to match well and find out what they're looking for in the facilitator. The facilitators get introduced to the VOD participants, and they start working with each participant, the person, incarcerated person, and then also the survivor. So both, of course, right, there's a lot of explaining about the program. One of our core values are agency, really wanting to give both participants a sense that they really are in the driver's seat and have a lot of say in what is going to be talked about and who gets to sit where, and to the extent possible, really giving them sense of control. So these separate preparation meetings, they can last from, I think the fastest we have done was 6 weeks, which is very unusual. Average is kind of 6 to 9 months, and we've had VOD lasting 2 years. And that sometimes, things happen in people's lives. This is a very deep emotional work. It's very intense for both parties, and sometimes more in the survivors' lives, things happen where they just need long breaks. And right, in some other states, there's more like, okay, you have 4 or 5 prep meetings and then the VOD needs to happen. We're really lucky and very well supported that we can really give this the time that it needs and don't have any kind of time pressure. At this point, there's 5 restorative justice organizations who facilitate victim-offender dialogues. And we feel very lucky. There's a lot of trust that we get from the Office of Victim Services in running these programs.
Martina now delves into the process of recognizing when someone is truly ready to sit down and have that face-to-face conversation in prison.
It's very intuitive work. And to me, it's almost like when we don't know what to talk about anymore, at some point, you just kind of know it's time that the conversation is ready to happen. But there are certainly markers that we're looking for, right? With the person who's caused the harm, we really want there to be accountability. And at times there is not accountability because they don't have the mental, emotional capacity. And then we're really, we might not necessarily say no for the survivor, you can't come in, but we really would only bring in a survivor where we feel they have the emotional capacity to be disappointed in that way and to not get what they're looking for. So if it's very raw and fragile survivors, we might say, this might not be the best thing for you. So we really pay a lot of attention to the people, to their emotional state of being, where they're at and what their needs are. And for the survivor, so the preparation work really includes what are you really looking for? I remember doing one VOD and we realized as she was talking, what she actually really needed was to breathe. Her husband was killed. She had 3 little kids. She never had time to breathe. So we kind of want to discover where are they really in their process of healing. We want to support them in really developing, and we call it a high level of self-agency in the healing, which includes really accepting the ability to accept what happened, to move away from just blaming the other person, because when you blame, you depend on the other person to kind of make the hurt go away. And healing really comes when people really recognize, somebody else has caused the pain. It's now my responsibility to take care of the pain. And that's a very, very bitter pill to swallow and really a huge task. And that is really what we have seen. A lot of the participants actually have done that shift. Very, very, very few survivors of severe violence start with anger and resentment and bitterness and, all the angst and sorrow and resentment. And many of the VOD participants in their journey for healing recognize that, they didn't want to be that person. They didn't want to be angry because they find themselves like Patty, whose husband was killed by a drunk driver, says, I found myself screaming and yelling at my children. because I was so angry, or Kevin, who was 13 when he was shot in the neck and was paralyzed. And he says, I was so angry. I just got too exhausted. I just didn't have energy to be angry anymore. So, and when people look in the mirror of really not liking who they have become as survivors, how this has impacted them, they start like, this is not who I want to be. I don't want to be angry. I don't want to be an hateful and angry person. So then it's almost kind of looking around and asking, what else is there?
This is the moment when someone who has been harmed begins to see the person who caused that harm as a human being. Martina will walk us through how someone decides to view the person who caused harm differently and how they come to the decision to change their life and seek a meeting with the one who hurt them.
Is curiosity. And once they start curiosity, anger is no option. So that's a choice, right? To choose not to be angry anymore. Then they need to make another choice. And that is how many of the people who end up asking for God get on the journey of self-agency in the healing, not making the healing dependent on anybody or anything outside themselves. Yeah, that journey does include for many of them being curious about the person who's caused the harm, developing even empathy for the person who's harmed them, and a measure of compassion for them, but most of all, curiosity. And we do not get survivors, victims who are very angry, rightfully so, and have unprocessed pain. Frankly, our society does very, very little for survivors. We spend billions on attending to the person who's caused harm, incarcerated, right? The imprisoning people. And we do very, very little for survivors. There's so many survivors who, decades later, walk around with unprocessed pain from what was done to them, from being victimized. And the survivors, right, who have not been supported in deeply processing and gaining a deeper measure of self-agency and really healing are not the ones coming to ask for a victim offender dialogue. When you don't know how to process your pain, what you do, you kind of, I call it stuffing it into the basement of your being, and it goes to the point like Mama Jane, her son was brutally murdered. And, she says, my son died twice. First, he died when he was murdered, and then he died again when I could not say his name because it was so upsetting to his two brothers. They just were not supported in coping and healing and making sense of what happened to them as a family when their beloved was murdered. And then the idea of sitting across from the person who's harmed you, right? You're meeting the person who's harmed you, but most of all, you're also meeting yourself. And all these unprocessed emotions would, get re-triggered. And people still don't know how to cope with it because it's not something we teach. We don't teach in schools how to grieve. We don't teach how to deal with trauma. So people are not prepared to cope.
Martina reflects on her time with Elle, whom we had the privilege of interviewing in episode 5, I Have a Hug for You. She emphasized how Elle's curiosity, sparked by her own grief, became a turning point. It's when she began to truly connect with Alan, his struggles with alcoholism, and the trauma he had endured.
And there's like Elle, her daughter was killed by a drunk driver, and she says, this person changed my life like nobody else. And I know nothing about him. It was his 7th DUI. So she was curious, and having had a lot of alcoholism in her family, she knew something had happened to this person. It's another reason why survivors come is they want to do whatever they can so that this person will never harm again. So they have an intuition of the core moment of restorative justice. In the criminal justice system, if there was a murder, the person was killed, The person who was caused the murder is told, you violated Penal Code 187. I think it's 187, right? Which doesn't mean a whole lot, right? And then they sentence and go to prison. When this person has to sit across the mother whose son was killed, they cannot help but feel the pain that this mother is experiencing. As humans, we are innately wired for empathy. If I smile long enough, see, I smiled at you and you smile, right? We are innately wired for empathy. So, and that is the core of restorative justice, to bring people to this empathic connection to the harm they have caused. And in that moment, when they actually feel the pain of the person who was harmed, they go, oh my gosh, this is what this feels like. I don't want to ever do that again. So, and that is what many of the survivors are after, right? To interrupt the cycle of violence. They don't want another family to suffer like they have suffered.
Next, we'll hear what it's like to be human in prison and the process of rehabilitation within those walls.
So, in working with the person who's caused the harm, mostly we're working on shame, right? There is this idea that people who have done horrendous deeds, horrifying deeds, that's who they are always. That's only who they are. And it's not, right? They're still human beings. They still have a beating heart. They still husbands and fathers and uncles and aunts and mothers. They're still human beings who have other ways of being in other ways in relationship other than causing severe violence. People take to heart what they did. We feel bad when we did not contribute to somebody's well-being, when we cause harm. It impacts us. There is what we call a moral injury. It hurts us when we hurt somebody else. We don't talk a whole lot about that, but this is what we see when we work with people in prison, how deeply impacted they actually are by what they did. When people are put into the right environment, if you have prison culture that supports people in staying in the life, the criminal life, and they're not caring about others, and when you are in prison, you're not particularly cared in a way that makes you think anybody cares about you. Prison is very, very punitive, so you're constantly wronged, you're constantly shamed. Prison is a little bit, let's make them feel really bad about themselves so they do good. Which is a logic that's like, wait, this is not how human beings work. Human beings will become loving, caring human beings when they are loved and cared for. So in California prisons, the whole rehabilitation and all the volunteers, all the people who go in there to work with people to come back home to their healthy self, not their wounded self, because we do know that most people in prison have experienced trauma themselves. It's this hurt people that some people don't like very much. But hurt people is also true for survivors. It's true for you, it's true for me. It's true for everyone. Shame is actually a very self-centered emotion. Shame is all, I am bad, it's all about me. So we really work with people to let go some of the shame so that they can make more room to have empathy and stay in empathy for the person who was harmed by their actions. If there's too much shame and too much guilt, there's no room left in their hearts to actually empathize with them. So we want people to let go of some of the shame. If you read James Gilligan's book on violence, shame is a root cause of violence. When we hate ourselves, when we think we're worthless, when we think we're good for nothing, when we think nobody cares about us, that is the moment in which we don't care about others and we don't have empathy for others. And that's the moment in which we can cause harm.
How facilitators create a safe space for survivors is through bearing witness, the importance of compassion, being fully present, sitting with the discomfort, and most importantly, validating both survivors' experiences.
We don't talk a whole lot of the power of bearing witness. So there's something that happens when we bear witness. It's something when people can just unload. Really, it's an unloading for the survivors, for the victims. It's an unloading of all the aftermath of what was done to them. To just speak it and to have the person who's caused the harm listen and hear it. Christy Morgan, she did a VOD. Her husband was stabbed as a police officer, and she got to do her own VOD with the person who stabbed her husband. And she said, Jason listened. And Jason was what we call a programmer in the prison system. So the people who really set out to change themselves and go through all the programs. So Jason had a lot of tools and emotional intelligence skills to be present and knew what to do in empathizing and having compassion for her experience. And Christy described it as, it was as if Jason reached into my being and he took all my pain and he knew so much better what to do with it than I ever will. I don't remember one survivor who did not say, I feel lighter. The old clothes wringers, like in the old days when you're washing your clothes. That's kind of the process we go through. Everything gets squeezed by the emotional intensity, and something gets squeezed out and left behind. And as facilitators, that's what we bring, right? We don't ask survivors to have compassion. If they have compassion, that's wonderful. If they don't, they need to do that. But the facilitators hold the container of compassion, of care, of dignity, whatever you feel, whatever you think, everything you bring to the table is okay, and we can be with it. And there's something in the being with it which transforms it. Angel Kyoto Williams says she's one of two Black Zen priests in the United States, and she says transformation happens when we allow ourselves to be moved by the truth of the other. And that's what we're doing in these VODs, right? Survivors get to really hear what happened. The court proceedings, it's not about the truth. It's about winning. It's an adversarial process, and people don't tell the truth. And often people who've caused harm don't get to apologize. So now they get to apologize. They get to show their remorse, and the survivor gets to actually see that. So there's this exchange of healing elements that happens that nobody else can give them to that extent. It's like 10 years therapy. It's just an extremely, very, very healing process to look each other in the eye and for the other person to say, yes, I did this. And for the survivor to hear that. That's what helps us to then access compassion and care. When we have seen, like in the trauma world, we say, the first level of trauma is the event. The second level of trauma is when our experience is not validated. So this is what we're doing, right? We're doing trauma work in these rods. There's validation of the experience of the survivor. Everything, whatever they have experienced, they get to share. And somehow when they share, they leave it on the table and they get to walk without that intensity.
Next, you'll feel how liberating this process of accountability is for both parties and how without it, the survivor can feel left alone in the world.
We also bring survivors into our groups to share their experience of harm, particularly in sexual harm. The people who have caused the harm are not taking accountability because it is so incredibly shameful. It's very difficult to take accountability for having abused your own child. So what we do is survivors who have experienced sexual abuse, especially, we bring them into our groups and they get to share. So the survivors also walk out with this like, oh, what just happened? I feel so much lighter. And I started asking them, when you come into our groups, is there any other place than in this group where your pain, your suffering, your brokenness, or your shattered life is as welcomed as it is by the men and women who have listened to you, the incarcerated people who are in our group. And they all said, heck no, after 6 months, nobody wants to hear anymore. After a year, like, can you just get over this? Survivors are left out here in our society. They're left alone. And they withdraw and they go into isolation. They're just not supported the way they need to. So, and in Tristan and Marilyn, two child sexual abuse survivors, who went inside and who got to share their stories, and they were welcomed. The people who've caused sexual harm, they say, we need to know what we did so we never do it again. How are we going to know if nobody tells us? So, and they both say, ironically, as a victim, I found in prison what I needed to heal. So keeping people apart, we cause so much harm. The people who are impacted need to be the ones who get to address what happened. The Aboriginals in Australia, so when things happen, there's swift punishment, but then the person who's caused harm gets taken back into the community as a wisdom holder. So people who've caused harm have wisdom in how one arrives at causing harm. And, I went to a sexual harm conference. It was all about child sexual abuse. And I go, wait, there's voices missing here. Why aren't we talking to the people who've caused the harm about prevention?
This is the moment when Martina has an aha realization. How does she process and cope with her role as a facilitator? Hearing these stories and helping to recreate such powerful memories.
So I have received 100 VODs requests. I have, I think, worked on 45 and I've completed like 26 VODs. So I've sat in these very intimate, very emotionally intense settings. What we bring and what we really, really do in these victim offender dialogues is a willingness to stay in the discomfort, a willingness to embrace the messiness of who we humans are, the willingness to see each other and to just stay present to whatever comes up. And that is our job as facilitators, to help both parties build capacity to be there for each other.
How is it that she's able to hear such horrific stories and have those deep conversations with people? I'm sure you're just as curious as I am, especially after listening to this season. I can hear it in her voice, this calm, soothing tone. Now she answers that question for us.
Compassion. I have a memory of a man who was extremely violent, and he shared his childhood story. And he shared of something he was asked by adults to do that was horrific as an 8-year-old. I'm not going into details. I don't believe in sharing details and leaving people with haunted images. But he shared the detail of what he was asked to do. And it had to do with, with a murder and there was blood. So I had these horrible images and they were haunting me. The Zen peacemakers, they go to places of atrocity and they meditate and exude compassion. And then there is the movie In and Out, this cartoon where they talked about memory not being like a drawer of the picture, but memory gets recreated in our mind every time. So we can actually change our memories. So I took those two, and what I did with this haunting image, I invited the Dalai Lama, Pema Chodron, all my Zen teachers. So I invited all these amazing, Desmond Tutu, all these amazing people who hold on to compassion for life. That's what I do. I just hold on to compassion for life. And I placed them in this horrible image. I had them meditate in their robes and radiate compassion. So now when I go back to the image, I have changed the emotional undertone of this image. And now when I go back, I don't cringe. I feel I'm connected to that compassion. Compassion is, I really think I'm so with the Buddha. It's my experience. It's our most powerful tool. If we cannot stay present to each other, to our connectedness, in the face of hurt, we're never going to make it. We need to stick it out with each other and stick it through it together and not vilify the other. And I was sitting with somebody who was violated a 4-year-old. I'm sick. Every time I think about it, I do get sick. I want to throw up. I get green. And I said this to him. This is how I feel. And then I said, and this is what you did? This is what you're living with? The young child you violated, like just holding both of them, like holding them with all my heart. Joanna Macy says, when our heart breaks, we can hold the whole world. And it's a capacity. It's something we can learn. I would love to continue this work because we have path, right? And we are, and you've heard like Jane and Elle, right, who are healing partners. And one time I brought a whole bunch of survivors. I'm like, it's all and I don't know, did I bring too many people? But what it did, we really had an experience of shifting from victim offender to there's trauma and you need of healing. That is the shift we need to make. And we need to come onto the same side of we're all traumatized. The person who caused harm and the people who were harmed, there is trauma. And we need healing. I do want to end with one of my favorite quotes by the Buddha. In separateness lies the world's great misery. In compassion lies the world's true strength. Prison to me lives in the lower brain. It's revenge. And revenge is a misguided need for empathy. It's wanting to cause harm, to recognize in the other that the other knows how I'm hurting. That is a need for empathy. I need to know that you feel my pain, right? What do we ultimately want? We're the most magnificent creatures, the most evolved creatures. Can we please start engaging and tapping into our own evolvement, which is, can we respond to wrongdoing with love? Can we wish the people who have done horrible things well? Can we love them despite of what they did, or even because of what they did, because they need more love? Can we have compassion? Compassion simply means to stay present in the face of suffering. Cynthia, her son Mitchell, was a 14-year-old killed by his friends. And she says, in my VOD, I learned that compassion is infinite. And can we recognize that we are all interconnected? We're all one being. And it's not a matter of deserving. This one deserves, this one doesn't. We all deserve the same. I feel so strongly about this, that who do we want to be? If we want to be in a loving, compassionate, caring world, let's be loving, compassionate, and caring to everybody. And Jesus, right? What did Jesus say? What you do to the least of us, you do unto me.
Martina, thank you so much for sharing your time, your wisdom, and your heart with us today. Your compassion and dedication to this work are truly inspiring. We're grateful for your space you've created, for these powerful conversations, and for everything you've taught us along the way.
Thank you for sharing this with the world. It's very much needed. And the people in prison really want to be seen and known that they're really trying to do the right thing.
Martina invited us into the profound and often misunderstood world of victim-offender dialogues, showing us that healing begins when we shift from anger and shame to curiosity, self-agency, and the courage to bear witness to another's story with openness and grace. Her wisdom has been a gift, opening my heart and mind in ways I never expected. I hope her words have offered you something meaningful as well. Perhaps a new perspective, a sense of hope, or even just a reminder that healing is possible, no matter how deep the wounds. Your willingness to engage with these stories, to sit with their weight, and reflect on their meaning has made this season of the Prison Podcast truly impactful. By listening, you have helped amplify voices that are too often silenced. As this season comes to an end, we leave you with important questions. What does accountability look like when rooted in humanity? How do we foster healing in a system built on punishment? These are not easy questions, but they're necessary ones. Next week, we'll be dropping a bonus episode where you'll meet Jorge, an incarcerated artist at San Quentin State Prison, whose work speaks to healing and redemption. He is the artist behind the Prison Podcast logo. Listen how he's rediscovered himself and hopes to inspire you to choose a better path. Until then, be kind to yourself.